Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie. I'm the circulation supervisor here at the Ridgewood Public Library. On behalf of the Ridgewood Public Library, Director Nancy Green, Library Board of Trustees, and the Friends of the Ridgewood Public Library, thank you for joining today's virtual author event, Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder by Julia Zarankin. The Ridgewood Public Library would like to thank the Friends of the Ridgewood Public Library and the Bergen County Audubon Society for sponsoring and partnering with us for this event. Please feel free to use the chat or question and answer button for questions and comments. We will try to get to as many questions and comments as we can at the end of the program. For copies of Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder, you can borrow from the Bergen County Cooperative Library System, download the ebook and e-audiobook from Hoopla Digital, available to Ridgewood cardholders, or purchase from Bookends Bookstore in Ridgewood, New Jersey, bookshop.org, or smile.amazon.com to support the Friends of the Ridgewood Public Library and the Bergen County Audubon Society. And now to introduce our author, please welcome Don Torino, President of the Bergen County Audubon Society.
Hello, everybody, and thanks to the Ridgewood Library for allowing us to be part of the program tonight. It's very exciting to become a birder or get started birding, and through the pandemic, it's been amazing how many people have learned to enjoy the birds. At Bergen County Audubon, our beginning birders class is kind of nicknamed Changing Your Life One Feather at a Time. And that's kind of what birding is. It opens up a whole new amazing world, connects us not only to the birds, but to each other. And I don't think there's anything better than that. So I appreciate it and look forward to a great program and to enjoy along with you. Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
and here's Julia.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dawn. And I'm so glad that you guys have a program called Changing Your Life One Feather at a Time, because that segues perfectly into the title of my talk. I am just sharing my screen with you. And here it is, Seeing the World with Wonder, How Birding Changed My Life. So indeed. And I want to thank all of you for coming to this webinar. It's wonderful to be in New Jersey. I'm in Toronto currently, and when the border reopens, New Jersey is one of the first places I'm going to go back to. I spent 6 years living there because you know, it is one of my most beloved places, and ever since I discovered birding there, it's really been fantastic. So thank you for taking the time out of your migration schedule to spend an hour here with me. And I can safely say that as an author, it is such a pleasure to have readers. I mean, honestly, that, you know, as an author, that's all I've ever wished for, to have attentive readers. So thank you very much for being here. So today I'm going to talk about my book and how it came to be, and I'm also going to read a couple short passages from the book. And I'll talk for, you know, about 30 minutes, and after that, we will open it up to questions. So feel free to ask me whatever you want about the writing process, about my life my new life as a birder, or whatever strikes your fancy. So I wrote this book as a memoir, and really it is a book about my midlife love affair with birds, and essentially a book about how birds taught me to see in a new way and really taught me how to see the world with wonder. And because we're in New Jersey, here's a photo of me in Cape May. This picture was taken by my long-suffering husband, who isn't really a birder, but he's a really great sport about it, and comes out with me all the time. And actually once when we were in Arizona, we booked a bird watching trip, and when I told our guide that that my husband was not a birder, he said, "Oh, you're an SOB, a spouse of a birder." So that's how he now refers to himself, the SOB. So anyway, here I am in Cape May, New Jersey. And this book is really a story of personal transformation, how I started out as a total nature novice, and after seeing my first red-winged blackbird, that was my spark bird. After seeing that spark bird, I really turned into a full-fledged obsessive birder. I still think of myself as a beginner birder, even though it's been 10 years. I'm constantly learning new things, and I really love being in this in this space of just learning constantly and marveling at everything I see. So I hope that never goes away. And I feel like birds really, in a sense, they kind of gave me a new lease on life when I needed it most. So I discovered birding when I was in my mid-30s, when I was in the midst of a career transition, which was, pretty dramatic moment in my life. And as everything was changing around me, I started to audition hobbies. And, I tried everything, pottery, bookmaking, yoga. And I was really looking for something that would exercise my patience, but without having to get into downward dog position or something like that. And then I came upon this essay by Jonathan Franzen called My Bird Problem, where essentially he writes about how birds transformed his life. And because I'm a writer and because I sort of absorb the world through words, that essay really stuck with me. And I thought to myself, oh my God, maybe that is what I need in my life. Maybe I need a bird problem. So I went out in search of a bird watching group in Toronto, where I was living, where I'm still living. And initially, when I went out birding, I was much more curious about the birders themselves than about the actual birds, because I don't come from a nature loving family. My parents are classical pianists, and I grew up going to libraries and museums and concert halls, right? My family didn't camp. We didn't really enjoy the outdoors as a family. I come from a family of Russian immigrants, which I write about quite a bit in this book as well. And, my mother always said, we didn't emigrate to this country so that we would sleep in a tent. And she always said the outdoors are for other people. So not only did birding really change the way I see the world, but it was also my real introduction to the outdoors and to nature. And in a way, this book is also about me belatedly finding my wild side as well. So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book when I meet my first bird group and see my spark bird. I had no trouble recognizing the group in the parking lot. Cargo pants tucked into socks, and signature off-white multi-pocketed vests, which I recognized from the times I had Googled bird watchers. Each of the half-dozen people huddled around their cars wore at least one item of bird-themed clothing, ranging from a subtle baseball cap with a woodpecker on it to a more boisterous sweatshirt featuring a giant red bird with black wings. So bright, I wondered for a minute if the bird could be real. I looked around for the leader while I tried to make sense of their optics talk. Questions about magnification and the optical quality of vortex versus eagle eye passed me by completely. But I understood enough to nod in appreciation when Lucy, a petite retired high school teacher, showed off her recently purchased high-end Swarovski binoculars. She later admitted with a mischievous smile that she had bought them with money that she'd set aside for a sofa. I knew the leader had arrived once a rusty Toyota pulled up and everyone said, "There's Brett." A 6-foot-tall high school math and science teacher, Brett wore sweatpants with a Norwegian knit sweater and a baseball cap with yet another bird on it. Initially stern, his face lit up when he said, "I read a pretty good report this morning. Let's head to Kipling Spit." Though the references to a report and Kipling Spit were both lost on me, I introduced myself, reminded him of the email I had sent a few days earlier, and sheepishly admitted that I was a complete beginner. Not to worry, folks in our group have varying degrees of experience. I mean, there isn't a single person here who can ID all the warblers. A warbler? I knew ducks and pigeons and owls existed, but what were warblers? Wow, you weren't kidding when you said you were a beginner. Nope. Do you have binoculars? I shook my head. That might be a good place to start, said Brett with a chuckle, which I thought might be code for, who is this interloper? How did she find me on the internet? And why on earth did I ever give her my email when she clearly said she didn't know a thing about birds? Once we got into our respective cars, our cavalcade of birders thundered down the highway until we reached a park at the foot of Kipling Avenue where the city meets Lake Ontario, and where, according to the report Brett had read on on the Aunt Bird's listserv, a western grebe had recently been seen. A kind gentleman named Benito, draped in a long-lensed camera and binoculars, and with a spotting scope casually resting on his shoulder, let me borrow his spare binoculars, which he alternately called his bins or binocs or glasses. The binoculars were heavy around my neck. As we walked out to the lake, people started shouting words that I couldn't process. Northern shoveler, red-breasted merganser, American widgeon, bufflehead, long-tailed duck. The binoculars wobbled in my hands. High winds accosted me, and when I tried to focus the lenses, my eyes watered. The second I glimpsed a duck, it dove and left me staring at the hyperactive early April waves on Lake Ontario. Wait, look, Brett shouted. I think I got it. Horn grebe over there, next to the pie-billed grebe. You can't miss it. To the right of the dozens, no, hundreds of redneck grebes out there. Oh my God, wait, is that a western grebe? Are you seeing the grebes, Julia? It's not every day you get 4 species in one place. My mind bobbed in and out of awareness amidst the sea of names. I nodded, but my binoculars were pointed at the CN Tower, the only thing I could safely identify on the horizon. What's a grebe? Start with the redneck grebes. There are close to 500 of them out there, Brett replied. You can't miss them. Gorgeous rust color neck. And look at that elongated bill. It's a textbook grebe. I located the mass of waterfowl, but in the dull light, I couldn't detect anything remotely rust colored, and all the bills looked identical to my untrained eye. On our way back to our cars, my extremities frozen from standing still in gale-like winds, I wondered how many more hours of staring at dark blobs on the water I could withstand. Disenchanted, I was preparing my exit speech to the group when we stopped near a bush and someone called out, "Red-winged blackbird." I almost didn't look because the thought of lifting the binoculars to my eyes brought with it a slight wave of nausea. But the bird stood still, balanced on a cattail, and I managed the trifecta of raising the binoculars, focusing them, and finding the desired object magnified in my field of vision. What is that? I gasped, nearly blinded by the unexpected vermilion patches on the blackbird's epaulets. I watched as the bird threw back its head, opened wide its beak, and let out a sound so primal it left me marveling. This was as close as I'd ever stand to dinosaurs. If this bird had been there all along, I thought, what else had I been missing? So that moment was really the absolute beginning for me. Seeing that red-winged blackbird really cracked my world open and made me realize how much more there was to see. So I should tell you one thing about this book. I am not an ornithologist. This is not science at all. This is definitely a memoir of how birding completely changed my life, and how I was in a bit of a, a little bit of a midlife crisis. And birding taught me to pay attention to the world in a new way, to really look at the detail of things. And I think birding really did make me a much more empathetic person. So it really, when I started birding, I really started paying attention to my surroundings in a completely new way. And that gave me a different way of being in the world. So here's one of my very, very favorite birds, the Cedar Waxwing. And I mentioned that this book is also a story about how I discovered nature and how I discovered my wild side. And part of discovering my wild side was having the experience of volunteering at a bird banding station. So here I am with the Cedar Waxwing, and I really do believe that the Cedar Waxwing has one of the absolutely best bird hairdos ever. And I do write about that in my book. So I'm just going to read you a short passage about the Cedar's Waxwing's fabulous hair. I first saw a Cedar Waxwing, Bombacilla cedrorum, in Luther Marsh, a few hours north of Toronto. It has a black eye mask, almost as if it's wearing a fetching pair of Ray-Bans, and a slick cinnamon gravity-defying crest on its head. You can see the crest a little better here. Its style is not as ostentatious as a northern Cardinal's, which basically screams, look at me now. But it's still full of grace, and even something beyond grace. It wasn't one Cedar Waxwing that we saw, but a flock that alighted on different branches of the same tree. And I was immediately struck by the bird's effortless yet perfect hairdos. This is a bird that never has to stand in front of the mirror wondering whether mousse or gel or some sort of pomade will do the trick, and finally abandoning all three overpriced options in favor of a ponytail, or better yet, a hair clip. This is a bird without hair issues. This is a bird I would love to be. And I mentioned this was also the first bird. This is also the first bird that I actually successfully extracted from a mist net at the bird banding station. And that was, I joke in this book that volunteering at the banding station was actually, I call it, going to bravery school, because as I mentioned, I didn't grow up with outdoors. I didn't grow up with pets. I was always afraid that, any dog I saw would bite me. I grew up sort of thinking that nature was dirty, and volunteering at the banding station and being this close to birds and having such a privileged vantage point, like, getting to hold a bird in your hand and getting to really sense the fragility and the magic of birds, and the fact that these tiny songbirds can travel such extraordinary distances and embark on these absolutely perilous migratory journeys. Like, that was such a profound experience for me. And so extracting this Cedar Waxwing was a pretty big deal. A number of years later, when I started volunteering at a bird banding station and began my treacherous journey toward learning how to extract birds from the lightweight mist nets, I held a Cedar Waxwing in my hand. Not only that, but I managed to extract the bird from the net, which turned out to be easier than I had assumed, since it wasn't tangled and it simply slid out. Nervously, I held the waxwing in bander's grip with the head snug between my index and middle fingers, and the rest of the bird's body in my cupped hand. I could feel the bird's heartbeat knocking against my shaking hand. I knew waxwings had silky plumage, hence their genus Bombacilla, which derives from the Latin for silkworm, but I gasped at the softness of the bird's feathers. It wasn't just that they were soft, they were miraculously soft, something almost otherworldly, like sensing an unexpected kinship, reaching toward a hand that suddenly felt familiar. Just as I inspected the bird's hairdo up close and marveled at my superhuman feat of actually handling the bird, holding it in my hands without killing it, the cedar waxwing spat up 3 plump red berries, one of which, semi-masticated, stained my khakis. So much for the resplendent beauty of nature. There is absolutely nothing cute, passive, or demure about birds, soft, silky plumage notwithstanding. So here are some more pictures of me at the banding station. On the left, that's me with holding a black and white warbler, and on the right, here I am with a bufflehead in my hand. So once again, this was really an apprenticeship in wilderness for me. This is where I found my wild side, and there's a chapter in my book about me trying to explore the wilderness even further. And after volunteering at the banding station for a couple of years, I decided to volunteer with Project Puffin, which is an amazing seabird restoration organization. And I spent a week on an island off the coast of Maine, volunteering with studying tern populations. And that is when I realized that my wild side doesn't quite go that far. And the place I probably really feel most comfortable is as an urban birder here in the city. So my quest for a wild side didn't quite work out when I was living in a wet tent on an island off the coast of Maine. So this book is very much also a journey of self-discovery and learning about myself and who I am, and also throughout my birding journey trying to figure out, well, what kind of birder am I really? Like, am I that field volunteer? I guess not. I kind of came to that 20 years too late. Or am I the birder that that goes to chase, or that chases rarities? Like, am I a twitcher, or am I a backyard birder, or am I just an urban birder? And that was kind of the big conclusion that I came to, is that there is no one way to be a birder, right? That birding is it has kind of become part of my life. It's who I am, and there is no one perfect way to do it. And here's another photo of the banding station, and this is, we call these Warbler Parties. So here I am. My hand is the one in the middle holding the Magnolia Warbler, and there's also some Parula Warblers and a black-throated blue. So the book is also about, I mentioned about finding my wild side, which turned out didn't really exist all that much, and also about taking risks and learning to do something just for the love of it. Because my whole life I had been a fairly goal-oriented person. I mean, I still am in many ways, but birding really taught me to slow down a little bit and to just accept where I'm at and sort of do something just because I love it. Like, there is no end goal for me in birding. I'm not going to be the super birder. I'm just going to be the person who enjoys getting out, marveling at the world around her, and really seeing the world around her in a new light. And what's interesting is that before I started birding, I really believed that nature was something that was located far outside the city. Like, I live in Toronto, it's a huge urban center. And I thought that in order to see nature, you need to leave the city and, travel to a cottage or go far away. And what birding showed me is that once I fell in love with birds, I started to realize that Toronto isn't just, this sort of concrete maze of buildings. No, actually now I see it as a city with interconnected wildernesses. And so birding really taught me how to appreciate where I live in a completely different way. It even, you know, it opened my eyes to the city that I've grown up in and that I've known all my life. And now I think of it completely differently. So here's another image of me at the bird banding station. Here, you know, here I am. This picture was taken a few years ago when the water levels of Lake Ontario rose, and so we had to, you know, we all had to wear hip waders at the banding station. And funny enough, when my book came out, there was an article written about me in the Toronto Star, and they asked me for nice photos of me doing birdie things. And as a joke, I sent this one along, and this is the one that, of course, made the newspaper. So here I am in my chic birding attire. And again, that, you know, I mentioned that birding gave me a totally different perspective on the city I live in. And it really showed me the beauty of urban nature and these urban pockets of nature. And here I am in my favorite park in Toronto. It's the park where the banding station is located. It's called Tommy Thompson Park. And it was such a shock for me to learn that you can see, you know, over 300 different species of birds right in downtown Toronto. So that was extremely eye-opening. So here I am in my new habitat. And people often ask me, you know, what is my favorite bird? And it changes, you know, it changes day to day. It really depends on what I'm looking at. But if I did have to pick a bird that, you know, that I really possibly adore more than all the other birds, it would be the American woodcock. So I'm going to read you another short passage from my book. If I could get a bird inked on my body, it would be the American woodcock, the largest North American shorebird, which hangs out mostly on damp ground in the woods, perfectly camouflaged with its surroundings. To me, the bird looks like an accident of nature. Its eyes grotesquely close together, perched high up on its head, giving it almost 360 degrees of vision for detecting predators, and an ultra-long, sensitive bill for probing the ground for worms that it cannot see. Stocky, short-legged, incessantly pouting, this is a bird with attitude. And yet the American woodcock is also one of the most curious Don Juans of the avian world. In early spring at dusk, the bird engages in an aerial mating dance that counts among the more peculiar things I've ever seen. The aerial display of the woodcock is so odd that many birding clubs host outings just to bear witness to the bird's eccentric pre-mating performance. It begins with a nasal peent, repeated more times than strictly necessary. Ornithology oracle Frank Chapman calls the peent the first notes of his love song. And if a nasal note weren't enough to get a girl going, what follows is nothing short of spectacular. The pouty, stocky woodcock hurls himself high into the ether on whistling wings, ascending in a series of wide circles as if he had suddenly developed the agility of a nymph. And then he plummets to the ground with a yelp and does the acrobatic feat all over again. These peents and aerial dances work like a charm in the spring. The American woodcock mates morning and night without fail for 8 straight weeks. What female wouldn't be seduced by such a show? After witnessing the stocky bird's transformation into an aerial gymnast, even I could be convinced to mate with a woodcock. So there you go. That is, that's my favorite, you know, my favorite bird. And What I realized over the course of writing this book is that I probably commit one of the cardinal scientific sins in that I anthropomorphize birds. I do the one thing you aren't supposed to do as a scientist, but luckily I'm not a scientist. But what happened as I was writing these as I was writing about birds and as I was working on this book is that I started to sort of see myself in birds and see myself in their experiences and in their migratory journeys. And the more I learned about migration, the more I also realized that I am also a migratory species of sorts. Like, I'm an immigrant to Canada from the former Soviet Union, but even before my family immigrated to Canada, you know, I'm Jewish, and so my family was displaced within the former Soviet Union during the war. They were exiled to the Far East, and so I come from this long line of migrants. So learning about birds kind of made me see myself and my own life experiences in the birds as well. And it's interesting because in a way this book began as a blog. When I first started birding, the whole world of birding was so completely strange to me, strange and unbelievable that I had to start writing about it. And so I had a blog called Birds and Words, and it was pretty jokey. I mostly wrote about my adventures in misidentifying birds, and most of the posts were quite humorous. And then two things happened. First, I saw a spotted towhee in Ontario, in southern Ontario, in January. And the bird had absolutely no business being in southern Ontario in January. And so along with my bird group, I chased this bird. And the more I looked at the bird, the more I started to wonder what it was feeling in this kind of displacement and what it felt like for that particular bird to feel snow. And I started to think back on my own life and moments when I had felt displaced. And I had lived in Missouri for a couple of years teaching Russian literature. And I felt very out of place there. And everywhere I went, people would say, wow, you're not from here, are you? And suddenly it's like I could identify with that spotted towhee. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I've been there. I know what this feels like. And that moment of when I identified with the spotted towhee, that was the moment when I realized, okay, this project of writing about birds, it's more than just these little humorous blog posts. And there's actually something that I'm investigating about myself, my own identity, my own kind of process of becoming. And shortly after that, another miraculous thing happened. The blog disappeared. The blog died, as these things sometimes do. I don't know, a server collapsed and my blog was gone. And that was really the impetus for me to start thinking about birds more seriously, and also about how birds intersect with my own life. And that was really the moment when I sat down in earnest to work on this memoir and really started thinking of it as a book. So here is another image. You know, I said that the American woodcock was my favorite bird. Number 2 is probably the snowy owl. And this is also an image from that same favorite park of mine, Tommy Thompson Park in Toronto. And before I started birding, never in a million years did I think that you could actually see owls in the city. And so learning about birds and getting to know birds was almost like discovering a secret language that nobody else knew. Well, of course, a lot of other birders knew, but nobody in my immediate surroundings knew. So I felt like I was privileged. I was privy to all of this sort of secret information. And so many people who live in Toronto have no idea that you could see a snowy owl in the city. And they, you know, a lot of people don't even know that this park exists in downtown Toronto, where you can see 300 plus bird species. So, you know, I had mentioned that birding really forced me to think about the place I live in a different way, and actually to find beauty in this urban landscape. And what birding also really taught me is to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, because when you look at a bird and when you look at all the detail of the bird, it comes alive in a completely different way. And I think that was one of the life lessons as well, to take that kind of detailed observation and that same kind of care and empathy that and to apply it to other facets of my life. And I even, you know, I write in this book in a sort of half in jest about how birding actually it improved my love life as well. And it made me a much better partner, because the thing about birding is, one of the most important things I had to learn is that you really need to pay close attention to the bird that's right in front of you, instead of the bird that you wish you were looking at. Because very often as birders, we go out into the field with a checklist or with a list of target species. And it is so important to really pay close attention to what's in front of you instead of what you hope to be seeing. And I've taken that as a really important lesson for my marriage as well, to always, you know, think about the person that is in front of me and who he is and what his qualities are, instead of wishing that he were someone else. Like, work with what you've got. So birding has, you know, taught me a surprising number of life lessons as well. And I really think that birding, in a way, is a total antidote to smugness, because birds really don't care about us at all. And I feel like it has been so instructive to me and important to have this outlet and this wonderful hobby that brings me outside of myself completely and outside of my own head. And I think that's really important. And also, birding has been all about learning to befriend failure, because to be a birder is actually to constantly be misidentifying things. And when I started birding, I was so afraid of making mistakes. And slowly, as I became a better birder, I realized that mistakes are at the heart of birding. That is how you learn. And some of my mistakes have been just like colossal, spectacular failures. Like when I accidentally mistook a hummingbird, a green heron for a hummingbird. Like, I have made unbelievable mistakes birding, and there have been so many times where I contemplated quitting, but birding really taught me to, in a way, befriend failure, and that has been so important in every asset of my life. And one of the most important things I learned about birding comes from Ken Kaufman's classic Kingbird Highway. And I'm just going to read a quote to you where he said, "I resolved to look at birds more carefully from now on." And this is coming from Ken Kaufman at the end of his book, after he's done a big year, after he's hitchhiked all over the United States, seeing as many birds as he could, chasing every single rarity imaginable. And here he is saying, "I resolved to look at birds more carefully from now on, to look at all of them, common or rare, to see if I could really get to know them. It was the beginning of the end of my interest in listing." And I found this so profound, because when I first started birding, well, actually, for a long time afterwards, and sometimes this feeling still creeps in, initially, I really wanted to be the person who saw the rarity, right? The person who found the cool bird. And what Kaufman is saying here is, no, look at everything with the same amount of detail and pay attention to the common birds. And I think he's also here really talking about learn how to see the extraordinary in the ordinary as well. And that was such an important lesson for me. And another important book that sort of gave me confidence as a birder and kind of as a person as well was this book by Simon Barnes, which is a pretty humorous book. It's called How to Be a Bad Bird Watcher. And in the book, he writes, bird watching is a state of being and not an activity. It is about life and it is about living. It is the habit of looking. And in a way, Simon Barnes gave me the confidence to just be whatever kind of birder I am and not worry about it. I mentioned earlier that I sort of had this confidence crisis when I was like, what kind of birder am I? I'm never going to be the super birder because, of course, I started way too late and I don't have the attention span. And I don't have the single-minded focus. Sometimes I twitch, but often I don't. Sometimes I just walk around and see what's in front of me. Who am I? And I found this really comforting when he said, it is the habit of looking. That in a way, birding is just, it's a way of life. And I have taken that to heart. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, that it is about life and it is about living. And what I am doing when I am out in the field is I am exercising the habit of looking and looking closely and appreciating absolutely everything I see. And when I bird, it feels like the world is full of possibility. And I'm just going to end on this note. This is some graffiti in Toronto by my favorite graffiti artist. I have no idea who this person is, but this person runs around the city writing "Tout est possible," everything is possible. And that is literally how birding makes me feel. It makes me feel like the world is opening up, that the world is absolutely full of possibility. And I think especially in these pandemic times, that is what has been keeping my spirits up and keeping me afloat. The fact that it is spring migration, the birds are all coming back. The birds do not talk about COVID. They don't care about COVID. They don't know it exists. They don't know about any of my petty problems. And that being among the birds really elevates me in this absolutely wonderful way and makes the world seem full of wonder. So I'm going to stop my screen share. Thank you so much. And let's open it up to questions.
And I'll also try to bring Dom back too. Hold on a second. Where is he? Oh, it changed. Let's see if I can bring him back. Oh, there he is. Thank you so much, Julia. That was wonderful. It was amazing. And I wish you could, it's so hard these days with the webinar, but if my computer screen kept yelling at me to unmute myself from laughing. It was really so joyful to hear you talk and all your experiences. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat box. We have one that came in while you were talking. I think you kind of touched upon it, but we can continue. So what was the timeline of your birding growth and writing about it? And specifically, when did you decide to write the book? And were there articles first? So that was, I guess, the blog, but if you could continue.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I started birding about 10 years ago. Well, no, it's 11 years ago. And right after I started birding, I started this blog. And shortly after I started the blog, a good friend of mine who actually lives in New Jersey, he's a big New Jersey birder, he invited me to start writing bird book reviews for birding magazines. So that felt very intimidating to me at the time. And I was like, oh my God, just send me the easy ones. Like, don't, send me the personal narratives, the ones I'll understand, even though I can't recognize a single bird yet. And so very slowly through those bird book reviews, I kind of started, I started to read more about birds, about books about birds, and also people's narratives about how they came to birding, and kind of started to get a little bit more involved in the conversation. And then I also, through birding, started writing some journalism about birds. Like after I did my first birdathon, I wrote about it for a big Canadian magazine. And so slowly things were I was building up my birding vocabulary. And then my blog died, like when, I don't know, 2015 or something. And that's when I really sat down in earnest to write this book. And it took a while, and then it was published. It was published last fall, so it was supposed to come out last spring, but everything shut down, so they moved it to the fall. And what's interesting, and Don actually mentioned this in his introduction, is that there has been, since the pandemic began, there has been this renewed interest in birding, like the surge of interest. And there were articles in the New York Times about how eBird, the citizen science program out of Cornell University, like their numbers just went through the roof last May during migration. Like they had never had so many people reporting. I think it was up 30%. And what's funny is that when my book came out, I gave a couple interviews on the radio in Canada, and people were like, wow, this book is so timely. Did you plan this? And so, for once in my life, the timing turned out to be actually great. So who knew that this would be a fringe benefit of the pandemic?
Can I just say, Julia, I mean, I think it is amazing at the wisdom you've gained in birding for such a short time. I wish everyone had that same wisdom that you have. And I wish, some of the old timers still haven't got some of that wisdom that you have. And that's really what birding is about. I've been out with some amazing world-class birders who have made terrible, horrible mistakes, which I thought were hilarious. And so that's not what it's about. Birding is the great equalizer. It's about, and ultimately what it does is teaches us how to care. Whatever else you want to talk about birding, whatever it does, it teaches everybody how to care. You can't help eventually seeing a little bird that just a few days before was in the Arctic or in South America wind up right in front of your binoculars. If that can't make you care, then I don't know what happens. And you've gained that wisdom and passed it on lovely. So it's appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that I love the way you put it, that it is an act of care. And for me, I guess because I didn't grow up around nature, it was such an eye-opening experience. And it's true that, I started to think about conservation and writing about it and seeing, well, what can I do? How can I help through telling these stories? So that became a really defining moment for me as well.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
And I wouldn't be surprised if more birdwatching memoirs come out, because as I bird with groups of people, I think they're the best storytellers. It always seems like, oh, I remember when I saw my first Baltimore Oriole, and it's like that whole, not just the bird, but that entire experience of that day just expands. So it's wonderful how they kind of help us retell our stories as characters.
Funny. Yeah, as I was starting to birdwatch, I was also starting to play badminton, and it was just so fascinating to see how the two different communities react to beginners. Like, the guys I played badminton with were like, oh my God, every time I walk onto the court, their faces would just fall. But, when I would go out birding with people, even these seasoned birders in Toronto, they were so eager to show me the birds. And I think there's nothing a birder loves more than reliving that moment of seeing a bird for the first time. And you get that high vicariously by showing it to someone else. So it was just
absolutely. Yeah. Well, when you said there's no right way to be a birder, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, years ago, to be a birder used to mean maybe you had to travel around the world, or you had to do see so many species, but now none of that matters anymore. You know, if you're just as much a birder if you bird in the backyard as if you do travel the world. So, and ultimately, that's what really brings us together.
Yeah.
The snobbery is gone, you know, now, thank God.
So we have a couple questions coming in. I might combine a couple. How long did it take for you to feel comfortable identifying birds? And someone wanted, they love your enthusiasm. And have you ever birded in other countries?
Let's see. How long did it take to feel comfortable? Oh, well, first I should say, initially when I started birding, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I could ever feel comfortable around these people. Like, look at all these multi-pocketed vests and what is going on. And the first shock for me was that I became one of them. And that happened fairly quickly. Part of it was like the quirky sense of humor, the puns, like that's one thing, you got to get used to the bird puns and the jokes. And I really, you know, I really like that. As for, you know, getting comfortable with the species, I went to Maine, not when I lived in that wet tent for a week, but I went to a bird watching camp in Maine. And actually that's where I met Scott Weidensaw, because he was my instructor. And I birded with this amazing birder who passed away a couple years ago, Peter Vickery. And he told me, he was like, you know, you're doing it all wrong, because I was trying to find the rare bird. I'm like, ooh, where's the rarity? And I was just like flipping through Sibley and finding the birds that had no business being in Maine. And I was like, maybe it's that one. And he's like, you're doing it all wrong. And he said, look at the common birds, learn the common birds first and really familiarize yourself with them, and then start adding to your vocabulary. So that's what I started doing, just walking around my neighborhood. And I'm kind of a slow learner. It took a couple years, and then volunteering at the banding station and actually seeing the birds up close, and finally understanding what Sibley meant by, oh, the wing bars, or look for this or look for that detail. That really changed things. So I would say it took, I don't know, like, I mean, I still misidentify a lot of things, but I'm quite comfortable with the resident species, like 5, 6, 7 years.
I'm very good at saying what it's not.
Yes, and that is so important.
Yes, I just like to say, if I had $1 for every species I misidentified, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd probably, you know, be on an island or my own country or something. But I wouldn't be here.
Oh, and there was also a question about other places I've traveled. So yeah, we went to Israel, which was actually absolutely fascinating because it's on a migratory flyway. So that was astonishing. Spain was really great, southern Spain for birds. I travel to the US all the time, so Arizona is a favorite place. We went to Costa Rica for a week, and that is definitely a country I want to return to. Central America. Just the colors you see in Central America, all the different varieties of turquoise. We just don't get that kind of color in North America on the birds. So I'd love to go back there, and maybe one day travel will be possible again.
Yeah, that's true. And we'll come and visit you up in Toronto as well.
Yes, please.
Someone would actually like you to elaborate on how you mistook a hummingbird for a green heron.
Oh my God, it was so bad. You're asking me to relive my trauma. Well, it's in my book. It's a chapter in my book. So, okay, here's what happened. We went to, it was with my bird group. We went to Long Point, which is one of the great migratory stopover places. It's on Lake Erie, actually across the lake from, I guess, Maggie Marsh. So great. And it was peak migration season. So during peak migration season, if you call out a bird, there will be 30 people standing around you, like within 3 seconds. And I was looking up and I'm like, oh my God, I see a hummingbird and it is big. Like, this is the biggest hummingbird I've ever seen in my life. And it kept growing in my imagination. And all these people crowded around me. And then finally, like, my bird my bird guide, my bird leader, he realized what I was looking at and he tapped me on the shoulder gently and he's like, Julia, it's a green heron. And I was mortified. I'm like, oh my God, I just want to disappear. But he was so gracious about it. And he's like, you know, it's often very, very hard to detect size and to see these things. Don't worry about it. And we just kind of laughed. But I guess I saw the bill and it seemed pointy and, you know.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. And it's green, you know, maybe ruby-throated hummingbird.
At that time, I had absolutely no idea that green herons could hang out in trees.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
So it was not on my radar at all.
Or even like turkeys roosting in trees. You see, like, how did they get up there? Just a few, I think one more question. Actually, someone in the comments said as the program was starting, a hummingbird was in their backyard. So you brought the birds to the Zoom program too. And it's their first for the season.
Nice.
So someone, I guess, had some experience banding saw-whet owls and wanted to know if you've ever seen a saw-whet owl because they're the most adorable things.
They are the most adorable things. Yes, we get quite a few saw-whet owls that come through in the fall. That's kind of their big migration. And the banding station where I volunteer, they do saw-whet owl evenings. So I have had the joy and privilege of seeing a saw-whet owl up close. I have not extracted one from the net. I'm still afraid of their little claws, but I've gotten to pet one.
Oh, yeah, nice. And now, if you could just help clarify something you mentioned, a different style of birding. And after reading your book, I think I mentioned the term to someone, twitching. I told someone I was twitching over the weekend and they thought I maybe had a medical condition. So that was an interesting term to learn of a different style of bird watching. So for those maybe that are not familiar with that term, if you could clarify what that is.
Yeah, I think it's a term that's used in the UK quite a bit. To twitch is to chase a bird. Like when you hear that there is a rarity either for your county or your state or whatever, the country that has appeared, and you hop in your car and no matter the distance, you will get that bird. And that's the twitch. And sometimes people have that urge.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And
I get it a couple times a year.
Yeah. Yes.
But I do have friends that they will twitch every weekend. So, or more often than that.
Julia, I want to thank you so much for writing this book. You know, when I read it, at first, I think I mentioned before, there were so many similarities, how I started bird watching, and I'm new myself. I'm only 3 years into it, I would say, and I was feeling a little discouraged, and a lot of what you wrote helped me to sort of keep up with it and to be more observant instead of just putting pressure on myself to find as many birds as possible. So I want to thank you so much for coming from Toronto via Zoom. I also want to thank Don and the Bergen County Audubon Society for helping us with these programs and to educate everyone in our area to get outside into nature. And you're getting so many comments from the chat. Thank yous from everyone. And I thank everyone here for coming to the program as well. I hope that everyone had as good a time as I did.
Thank you so much.
We have to end. I'm having too much fun here.
Yes. Well,
I just want to say that, Julia, I think you've done so much for birding by writing this book that you don't even know how much you've done for it, I think, and it's fabulous.
Thank you so much, Don. That's really, really wonderful to hear.
Yes.
You're welcome.
And when you're able to feel comfortable to come back to New Jersey, please look us up so we can invite you to some great Audubon walks here in New Jersey, and we could show you all the great stuff here.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Yes. And lots of comments. It's so entertaining, informative, just great. People are reserving the book at their local library. So great. Well, I'm going to end it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you again, Julia and Don.
Okay. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.